Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Mark.
Deja vu all over again.
Good to be back,
Nice.
even if it's Laguna Beach, not Bedell.
Yeah, well, nice to have you here. This is, now how many times have you and I done this?
At least 6 or 7, I can't remember.
Yeah.
We missed last year. We missed last year.
That's right, yeah. I hope we don't miss again.
Yeah.
For those of you, and there are many of you who have been with us during all of that, you are aware that we have had a series of conversations with Bill Janeway, mostly focused on various interpretations of risk and how it is mismanaged or managed properly. And we've been talking just yesterday about maybe trying to get those all together, either into a DVD or into someplace online or as a transcription. So I think you'll actually have a chance to see all of these conversations from the last 6 years. And then you're working on a book. You want to say something about the book?
Well, we'll start because this subject here came out of spending the first couple of months of this year thinking about how am I going to finish this book? Because what I was trying to do is build a bridge between what I learned, if you like, sort of top down, reading, studying, analyzing, and from books, and what I learned bottom up from experience. And what brought it together was recognizing how important it is to take waste seriously.
Yeah. If
you study economics, and anyone here who took a economics course knows that what economics is about, is supposed to be about, is efficiency. That's the virtue, right? That a competitive free market will efficiently allocate scarce resources to satisfy the preferences of consumers.
Which we blew to bits in the first conversation 6 years ago.
That's right. But that notion has served a double purpose. And I first came at this, I have to confess, now almost 45 years ago, when I was doing my doctorate at Cambridge, my first stint at Cambridge University back in the end of the 60s, and I was studying Keynes's analysis of how we could have experienced this enormous waste of 20-25% unemployment, machines rusting, skills atrophying, and what I've come to call Keynesian waste, right? And what Keynes proposed was intervention, spending, when the private sector stopped spending, stopped employing, that the government could come in and spend money. And it didn't really matter in that context what the government spent money on. That's what Keynes said. In fact, there's a line in General Theory that's now forgotten, but it sort of illustrates what his point was, that the simplest thing the government could do was to take pound notes, sterling pound notes,
a big bucket of
put them in empty bottles, put the bottles at the bottom of unused coal mines, and then, as he said, leave it to the profit motive to get that money and put people back to work. And as people went back to work and spent money, then resources would start to be efficiently allocated again. Well, he lost the argument. He lost the argument because that notion of efficiency carried over. So that even when you had 25% unemployment, same thing was true in the United States. Yeah. Even when you had 25% unemployment, every project that the government spent money on or proposed to spend money on was evaluated in terms of its efficiency, its productivity, as if everybody was already fully employed.
Yeah.
Exactly. So as a result, the way we got out of the Depression was through the most enormous expenditure in the history of the world, called World War II, which, of course, was an investment in waste.
They took all the money, they put it in bottles, they sent it over to Europe.
Well, that's right. We put it in B-17s, and they put it in landing craft, and they killed an awful lot of people doing it. So that's sort of the Keynesian waste. And my point here is that mainstream conventional economic theory, with its focus on efficiency, inhibited, prevented dealing with Keynesian waste.
Yes.
But then you go to the other side, and this is where it's sort of the bottom-up experience as a working venture capitalist for 40 years. everybody in the business knows that if you win, when you win, it's a process of trial and error and error and error. Out of any portfolio, a small number of the deals make the portfolio. If you look at the whole array of venture funds over the last 30 years, 35 years, it's a small number of those funds that generate all the excess return. You can scale it up, and in Schumpeter's notion of creative destruction, that doesn't take place because some genius sits at a central console and says, we're going to do this, this, and the other. You can do that if you're playing catch-up, you know, Japan, China, United States in the 19th century. But when you get to the frontier, you get to a process that can be broken into three pieces. And two of them are necessarily wasteful. Upstream, discovery, invention, scientists, engineers, trying to see what might work, trying to understand the world, trying to make stuff, understand principles.
Basic science.
Basic science. You can't plan that.
Yeah.
There's a great story. You'll love this one. There's a guy called John Gurdon, got the Nobel Prize for doing something that everybody agreed was impossible. Take the nucleus of one cell, put it into another cell, and have that nucleus control what happens in the other cell.
Yeah.
So he applied, when he applied to the Research Council for funding, they said, forget it. I mean, we're not even going to read your report. Everybody knows that can't be done. So, of course, he went off. He begged, borrowed, and stole, got a little money. It worked.
Did it.
Transformed biology.
Yep.
So his message when he gave a lecture last year was to the young scientists, if you really want to try something new, first do the experiment, then apply for the grant. So you've got this one, you need a source of funding that is unconcerned.
It allows waste.
With economic return.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, in the old days, you know, Darwin's father was a very successful angel investor. Invested in the first industrial revolution, made a ton of money, so Darwin could clip coupons, do whatever he wanted. He was funded, his research had nothing to do with trying to make money directly from what his actual practice was.
Same with Newton.
Same with Newton. During the course of the late 19th century, as these great corporations, General Electric, then AT&T, were established, they were effective monopolies. They were generating tons of money, in economic terms, what are called monopoly rents, above what the profits would have been if there had been a competitive market.
Right.
So if you're sitting, if you're in GE in 1900, or you're in Xerox in 1960, or you're in IBM any time in between.
Or Microsoft in...
Yeah, Google. Yeah. You have a choice.
Yeah.
You have a choice. You're making all this money. Now you can do one of three things. You can cut your prices, give it to your customers, right? Yeah. You can pay out big dividends, give it to your stockholders, right? Or you can invest in Bell Labs, Murray Hill, Yorktown Heights, Xerox Park, what have you. You can invest in science. The number of Nobel Prizes that were won at Murray Hill, at Bell Labs, or at the various IBM research labs is a meaningful number.
Yes.
Again, the source of funding, that money wasn't going to produce new products. It was way upstream in science that effectively was given to the world to exploit.
You know, the telephone didn't change for 50 years.
That's right.
But they did the most amazing things at Bell Labs.
And of course, you have example of where the research that was done, of course, Xerox PARC's the most famous, but the same thing was true at IBM. The research that was done, when it was exploited, created products that the guys who funded the research couldn't bring to market themselves because the new business was never as attractive as the business that was generating all the profits.
Yes.
There was a great example at IBM in the, and this is really bringing it home, in the late 1980s, there was a research group in Austin, Texas, led by a wild man called Andy Heller, great engineer. And some of the folks in the audience may know Andy. So Andy was given the job of designing the machine that was going to kill Sun Microsystems. As Unix began to take off and the workstations became servers and you got client-server networks, and there were people at IBM who recognized this was a threat. So Andy built this great machine called the RS-6000, and he was invited up to Armonk to do his presentation of his business plan.
Yeah.
Very aggressive. It showed in 3 years they were going to generate $600 million of revenue. They were going to make 30% operating margins. They were going to pay back the investment in 4 years. It's a great deal. What he didn't know was that they'd set him up, because in the same conference room where he did his presentation, they had the team from Rochester, Minnesota, that owned the AS400. The AS400 was completely proprietary, closed box, and it was the most successful computing product ever introduced to the market. It was doing $14 billion in revenue, $10 billion of free cash flow. And they looked at Andy Heller and said, you know, so you want to cannibalize this. This is your purpose is to cannibalize this, right? That's innovator's dilemma.
Yeah, it is.
The story is that Heller responded appropriately. The way he resigned was to leave his Harley in the atrium at Armonk, at IBM headquarters, with the engine running and his ID hanging from the handlebars. He went out to Esther Dyson's conference in those days, the PC Forum, and told everybody the story. That's why I know it. But so the point is that you had this sort of the gentry, the rich folks, paying for science as a sort of hobby. You had the big companies funding these research labs. As they began to get competitive, however, they couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And fundamental research hasn't taken place, by and large, in the big companies for a long time.
Yeah.
But after World War II, you got the United States government. You got Defense Department, the NIH, the first ever massive investment in fundamental science by the state. And that's where trying to pin down, trying to measure the effectiveness of that, there's a program now. This is really disheartening. When you start really worrying about how effective your investment in science is, it almost certainly means you're losing.
Yeah.
So we've got a program now that the National Science Foundation and the NIH are jointly responsible for. It's the worst, it's the most convoluted acronym I've ever heard. It's called STAR Metrics. And it goes something like Science and Technology for America's Reinvention, measuring the effect of, I think I lost a T there, of research for innovation, competition, and science. What it means is everybody who's getting a grant from the government is supposed to be filling out forms and demonstrating that if they got some money, it downstream, led to some venture guy building a product, launching a product. And that's not what science is about.
No.
That's not what science is about. But so in the notion of Schumpeterian waste, you've got this upstream need for investment beyond what we know is going to be useful. If you know it's going to be useful, it's not research anymore, it's development.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But downstream, you have the other factor. When you have one of these really big deployments of new technology, the railroads, electricity, highways and the automobile, the internet, trying to work out what the hell this is actually good for, what difference is it, what's the killer app? Again,
It's never apparent, is it?
it's always trial and error and error.
Yeah.
So I did a little homework. We had the first great railway boom in the United States in the 1840s. It took 30 odd years. Montgomery Ward in 1872, Sears Roebuck in 88. Turns out the killer app for the railroads was mail order to create a national market. with branded goods you could trust, whether you're on a farm in Nebraska or in a gold miner in the Sierra.
Now, wasn't oil also a pretty poor big story there?
Well, oil comes in. I mean, oil was a small industry until the end of the 19th century. Yeah. And then it began with the bringing the oil didn't move through pipelines until the 20th century. It did move on the railroads. Yeah. But the second source, or the second way to fund waste, and this really used to upset economists are kind of getting their heads around this now, is financial speculation. See, look at LinkedIn, the LinkedIn IPO. Takes us back 10 years, makes us all feel young again. The guy who buys LinkedIn at that IPO, how interested is she in what the net cash flow earnings per share of LinkedIn 5 years from now are going to be? What in finance theory is called the fundamental, the net present value of the expected future cash flows. You're not interested in that. You're interested in in what the supply of greater fools is.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
There's a great paper by a couple of guys at Princeton, Jose Shankman and Wei Zhang, which makes the point that implicitly, every time you buy a share of stock, and especially if you're buying it at an IPO, you're buying the stock and you're getting an option. The option is the option to sell it to somebody else before you find out what its fundamental value really is. And there are times like 1999, 2000, or right now for social media companies, when the option's worth more than the stock. Right?
By far.
And that's how you get bubbles. That's the endogenous process of generating bubbles. But the point is, you need bubbles. You need bubbles to pay for the network before you find out what it's good for, and to finance the exploration of this new economic space. If you waited to do that until it was all obvious, by definition, you're playing catch-up. By definition, you're the follower.
This strikes me, this is true in real estate. It's also, it makes me wonder, when you look at science, if science doesn't move very fast these days, it seems to me, and if it's incremental, all the money that's spent on grants for do-nothing science is kind of wasted.
Well,
and so is there, I guess what I'm driving at are there social norms like peer review processes that actually create waste?
There's a lot of argument and a lot of discussion about this, because I don't think there's an easy answer to this at all. On the one hand, when in the funding of science, if you don't have peer review and anything goes, it's like you've got this, we have a National Institute of Alternative Medicine because a couple of congressmen, had a faith healer out in the Midwest and they couldn't get funding from the NIH. And so
or they had a brush with American.
They demanded.
They may have had a brush with modern American medicine.
Right.
Yeah.
So they demanded that the NIH fund some of this, genuinely wacko stuff. On the other hand, peer review will typically tend towards being conservative. You're doing what Tom Kuhn, the Structure of Scientific Revolutions, what he called normal science. And that's where John Gurdon.
That's what I say. Gurdon said that for the
exactly right.
Yeah.
So it's a delicate balance. Saying that we should abolish peer review, that's not the right answer. On the other hand, finding organizations that genuinely are thinking out of the box. I mean, for the IT revolution, for the digital microelectronics, who would have expected that it was going to be the Office of Naval Research that in 1947-48 became the most imaginative, creative, far-sighted. They had some strange people who, this was long before DARPA. DARPA was funded after Sputnik, 10 years later. Office of Naval Research probably had as much to do in the early days with the inventions that led to computing as any organization in the world. So, you need a certain kind of randomness
Yes.
out of all this waste
Yeah.
for the good stuff to emerge.
It's almost, I mean, we're sitting here categorizing waste, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's almost though you kind of have to do that. You have to.
That's right.
You have to look at waste as a good.
Yeah. So even if you need bubbles at one stage, at the final stage of the innovation process, I mean, most bubbles are completely wasteful. I mean, the point about financial markets, any financial market anywhere will tend to show herding behavior, momentum investing. An index fund is a momentum investor by construction. Apple goes up, you got to buy more Apple in order to match the index. Anything can be the object of a bubble. Tulip bulbs, Latin American debt, real estate again and again and again. The bubble of 1999-2000, left some really good stuff behind. We sure wouldn't have Amazon without it. We wouldn't have Google without it. The bubble of 2004 to 2007 left us with all these houses in the desert that are never going to be occupied. Total waste. So the way I've tried to think about separating out the bubbles in the stock market that are limited to the stock market do relatively little damage when they burst. All bubbles burst. Question is, how much damage do they do along the way?
What do you get for it, and how much?
Exactly right. What do you get for it, and what's the cost after the bubble bursts?
Right.
When the bubble involves...
It's the return on bubble.
Yeah, return on bubble. That's a good idea. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Footnote, Mark Anderson, return on bubble. When the bubble brings in the credit system, the banking system, let alone the shadow banking system, that's when it bursts. It doesn't just mean that the people who bought the stock at too high a price lose money. The provision of credit to the companies that already exist freezes.
Yeah.
And that's what happened in 2008.
Yes.
So the economic consequences are radically different.
Yeah.
So intervention to limit, reduce stupid lending is, in my view, much more legitimate and appropriate than intervening to try to keep people from buying LinkedIn and bidding it up.
Which no one's doing.
Yeah. Though back in 99, 2000, or 2001, 2002, there was a certain...
Mr. Greenspan.
Yeah. So this whole notion is you can close the loop a little bit, right? So if there's full employment in the economy and you're on a high growth trajectory, as we were for the 20 years after World War II, the cost of the Schumpeterian waste, the cost of the bubbles, is going to be less. You're going to have demand when new products
eclipse
old ones, when old established companies are put out of business. There are going to be jobs, and there'll be investment opportunities for the people and the capital that's freed up. If you've got 10% unemployment, it is much more expensive.
Yes.
And that's where closing the loop.
This came up in the Deloitte conversation the other day. Yes.
Right. So reducing Keynesian waste actually contributes to reducing the cost of the good Schumpeterian waste. That's closing the loop. That's what I'm trying. That's how I've decided I'm finishing the book.
Perfect.
So you guys all got it. You still have to buy it, by the way. As always, Mark.
Yeah, I think you did it.
Great to talk.
Thank you, Bill.
Pleasure.
Thanks very much.